Good morning and welcome to day 4 of Caribbean Environment Week 2020, where we're talking about bold steps towards a sustainable future. Caribbean Environment Week is brought to you by Live Eco in association with Environmental Solutions Limited and our sponsors, Scotiabank, Coca-Cola, Junk Cayman, as well as Cayman Business Solutions. My name is Abigail McIntosh. I'm a senior environmental analyst and project manager at Environmental Solutions Limited here in Jamaica. And I'll be your moderator for today's session on planning for an uncertain future. Thank you for sticking with us from Monday, where we kicked off Caribbean Environment Week. And if today is your first day, welcome. Thanks for coming. You can check out Live Echo's YouTube page for recordings from all the sessions in case you missed it. Thanks again for tuning in here on Zoom, as well as via our live stream on YouTube. Today, we're joined by two of our very esteemed colleagues, Dr. Earl Bailey, who is a consultant development planner and has lectured at both the University of Technology and the University of the West Indies, and Steve Kemp, a spatial planner and executive director of Open Plan, based out of the UK. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you.
Okay, you can turn your cameras on so the people can see you.
Okay. Thank you for your wonderful welcome.
Oh, no problem. All right, welcome to day 4. We're excited to have you here. And we'll just kickstart it by you telling us a little bit about yourselves. We can start off with Steve. Steve, you're a spatial planner. Can you tell us a little bit about what a spatial planner does? And are there any differences between a spatial planner, a land use planner, an urban planner? What are the differences?
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Abigail. I think we used to generally be called town and country planners. And then sort of various specialisms came about, like urban planning and rural planning, regional planning. And I think then a few years ago, there was a sort of decision that we ought to try and simplify things and all become spatial planning, because basically the common denominator in all the work we do is looking at the space that we all use and trying to mediate between all the competing uses for it. So that's what I do, and I do that partly in the UK and partly in the Caribbean. And at the moment, partly in the UK for the Caribbean, which is very odd.
All right, Dr. Earl Bailey, tell us about your planning journey. What got you into planning?
Well, I got into planning in 1988, I think, as a student, yes. At CAST, when I did the planning program there. It was a diploma then. I did further studies at UWI at the master's level in planning and environmental resource management. I was one of the first persons in the Caribbean to bring remote sensing and GIS to the Caribbean, yes, from as far back as 1991, from Colombia. Yes, nice. I can boast that. I did
Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Well, I did my doctorate degree in China, in Wuhan, and finished in 2012, 14 thereabouts, in urban planning and land resource management. Now I am lecturing at UTech and UWI in the field of planning and disaster management. I consider myself a general planner. I don't specialize in spatial or environmental. I'm a general planner. I do a lot of work, a lot of research, some publications on this same field, sustainability, land development in Jamaica, spatial planning. Urbanization is one of my pet peeves, given the fact that it's one of the most important issues facing mankind now at the social level. It touches every aspect of our lives. And I think that as a country, we are still not understanding the impacts and the scope of urbanization to incorporate it into our psyche, more so our planning culture. I think that our legislations driving planning are antiquated, out of touch with all realities that we are facing now. And for some reason, we are straddled with traditional systems that continue to fail us, that we're still struggling to change. I don't know why, but I think current COVID conditions and the urgencies of climate change and climate departure are forcing us to really take a hard look now on making substantive turnaround in how we approach living on this island space. So I hope that I trust that this conference will be one of the most significant platforms where some discourse can be had to inform public perception, to guide public perception, to guide our governance mechanisms to seriously reconsider the way we're doing things, because it cannot be business as usual. I mean, that has been the mantra for the past 2 decades, and still we're not seeing the sort of changes that we need to make our systems, our social and ecological systems, more sustainable. So I welcome this platform as a serious endeavor to push that agenda forward. And it's good that we have somebody here from the mother country, England. I mean, we tend to align our development to our British history, as we say. So many of our legacies for planning and development are from our historical link with the British and the Europeans. So many of our legislations, our Town Planning Act itself is from the British Act of 1957, which we still have, which they have thrown out since then. So I think it's good that we have somebody here from that space, where we can see. I can't
take all the responsibility for that.
No, of course not. we can see how can we know look at the impact of the British system on our system in a different light. And see how we can converge our ideas to make things better.
You've raised some amazing points, and I thank you for that. And we really hope that this platform, this Caribbean Environment Week, will achieve all of those things that you spoke about. But just on that point that you raised about our development being influenced by our colonial history, most Caribbean urban centers are along the coast, and and we can trace that back to that colonial past. So they're densely populated, they're growing rapidly, and there are significant economic and trade centers. But being along the coast has some inherent challenges, especially in light of climate change. So, how do we plan for these unique coastal challenges? See, we can start with you.
Yeah, obviously it is a challenge. Again, it's not peculiar to the Caribbean. In that most, I suppose, if you look at the world's major cities, most of them are coastal. So it's something that I think needs to be tackled truly internationally. Obviously, in the Caribbean, there's particular issues to do with the climatic changes that are taking place, particularly in relation to storm surges and the vulnerabilities that go with that. But as I say, I think it is something that we all need to work together on. And picking up on Earl's point, I think that I suppose Britain imposed a particular approach to planning on Caribbean and other former colonies, and it's probably an approach that really it didn't work that well in Britain, and I think it's changed here, and it's probably got a bit fossilized in some parts of the Caribbean.
Yes.
And so we need to reinvent that. And I think the way that we look at cities is a major part of that. We've got to engage the communities much more in the process of planning their cities. And we as planners need to have a bit of humility and work with people rather than impose the answers on them.
Right. Can you tell us a little bit about some examples from around the world where they're planning for coastal living?
Yeah, I mean, the one that tends to be looked at from our perspective very often is Holland, the Netherlands, where you've got a country that historically most of it's been below sea level for most of time, if you like, and they've learned sort of engineering techniques to deal with that. Those have some role to play, but I think particularly in the context of the Caribbean and the tropics generally, there needs to be much more awareness of the interplay between nature and human activity, and using some non-engineered methods for protecting our cities and our coasts. So working with the ecosystem rather than apart from it. So whereas in most Caribbean cities, the mangroves have been demolished to make way for housing, perhaps we have to start reintroducing that and look at the way that the drainage systems work in the cities as well, and gradually work towards that, whilst also accepting that a lot of climate changes are going to happen anyway. So working with some of the traditional techniques, and I'm dashing about a bit here, but I'm thinking particularly of Kingstown in St. Vincent, where you've got a city that had a very, very good traditional approach to providing shade and shelter within the city centre through colonnades, and it was probably something that was inherited from colonialism, but it was an adaptation to the climate, and that sort of thing has been got rid of, whereas perhaps we now need to be reinventing it in a modern form. Sorry, so I've realised a bit of a jumble there, but a few ideas.
No, extremely coherent there. Earl, anything you want to add to that? What are the sort of uncertainties that we need to be planning for, especially as coastal cities?
First of all, it's hard to plan for uncertainties. I don't think you can plan for uncertainties, as a matter of fact, because planning has to be context specific, context in terms of time, place, and purpose. So without that context, you can't plan without that context. But just to follow up on the point of cities that are exposed at the coastal level, basically all the world's major urban centers, from Calcutta, Mumbai, Dakar, Guangzhou in China, Shanghai, Bangkok, Miami, Lagos in China, Tokyo, Jakarta. These are major urban centers that have existed in these spaces for some millions of years. And they have learned to build resilience in their entire systems. The Caribbean should have enough templates to work from.
Right.
So there's no need for us to recreate the kind of intervention we need to make our cities work. And I think we have to take the bold step of thinking now, do we need to have this kind of urban spread around the island? How do we, the fact is that our Town Planning Act, the Town Planning Act does not define what is town and what is country. So without a legal definition of town and country, it's hard to build a city's structure without a legal foundation, a legal base that defines it, because that legal base will define the sort of structural interventions that are needed, right? And the sort of social contracts that need to be organized on that physical space. So I think the lack of proper legislations to properly contextualize urban or town and country is still part of our major problem. I think, well, in Jamaica's case, most of the country's most important infrastructure and services are located in coastal areas, especially within the Kingston metropolitan region, which I think stretch from Clarion Park to Yalas. That's where the bulk of the country's capital resources are located. Our major telecommunications infrastructure, health infrastructure, security, the seat of government. I mean, the bulk of the population, the bulk of our educated population, among other things, oil installations, major factories, all of our everything that makes a country run is located in that airport. Is located in that space.
Yeah.
And it is not far-fetched that if we got a tsunami like they had in Asia in 2000, 2004, that's gone in a jiffy. There's no going around that. There's no going around that. But even with that knowledge, even with that certain knowledge, so here we are, a certain future now, right? We still do not see the sort of actions taken, given the fact that these are real scenarios that can play out on this space at any given time. So it would seem that that knowledge, having the knowledge of what will happen, is still not initiating the kind of action we need, and not having the knowledge is creating the same non-response. Yeah. So I think one of the things that has spoiled us over the post-Gilbert decade is that we haven't been exposed to the sort of natural sort of phenomena that has translated into proper disasters. So we're always been spared the brunt of disasters. We're always been spared, and I think it's spoiling us. I mean, Japan has learned to live with earthquakes and tsunamis. It's part of their lifestyle,
right?
Because it happens so frequently. So they are forced to change their systems to accommodate these things. I don't think we're having enough.
You've perfectly allowed us to jump into our first poll, which is actually on disasters. So I'm going to ask my co-host, Daniel Nemhard, to launch the first poll. And then we can speak about that some more. Have you ever been impacted by severe natural hazards? Drought, flood, hurricane? Yes or no?
Oh, you said host and panel cannot vote.
Give you about 10
That's not
seconds
fair.
to respond to that.
Why is it host and panels cannot vote? I don't understand that. Wow.
There we go. 91% saying yes. So Earl, you were continuing, just continue for us. You were talking about living with disaster. So right now, top of mind for us is all the flooding impact that we've been experiencing here in Jamaica, but Antigua and Barbuda just experienced some flooding. So flooding, landslides, all of these different things, they're not unique to Jamaica. You know, it's a phenomenon that we experience here in the Caribbean. So we want to talk about not just flooding, but natural disasters, planning for natural disasters. So Earl, you were already talking about that, so you can just continue, and then I'll ask Steve to jump in after.
As I was saying, we have not been exposed to proper disasters to make our lives sensitive to these disasters. We have not changed our social and physical systems to accommodate these phenomena over the past decades. Post Gilbert. Gilbert was a major game changer. I mean, you saw a significant change in the country's culture post Gilbert. That has not happened since then. It happened before Gilbert in I think it was the 1907 fire and earthquake in Kingston, something thereabout, when the entire country's building code changed into reinforced concrete and corrugated steel. So we have evidences where significantly serious events have caused us to change our way of operating. But these floods are not, even though they are intense, they are not affecting the national psyche, because the bulk of the population is unaffected. So we haven't had any national events at the national scale. We have flooding in certain areas, but not at national level, and therefore the national psyche is unaffected by these events. And therefore, when the person don't feel
so you're talking about Jamaica's psyche, but what about, for example, Barbuda or Dominica or any of those other Caribbean nations? Do you think that their planning has evolved from some of the more recent issues that they've experienced, natural hazard?
Why go so far? Just go to Cuba. The Cubans have done a lot more with the embargo and socialism that we have done with this liberal democratic system and free market economy. in terms of building resilience in part of their governance and infrastructure planning process. They have done a lot more with that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I think inevitably, if you're going to plan for the well-being of the people as a whole, then there have to be some restrictions on individuals. And on this sort of matter, we can identify the areas that are at greatest risk of flooding, for instance, and we can come up with planning policies that say, okay, you avoid building vulnerable things in those areas, and you try to promote those in areas that are at lowest risk of flooding, and then you have various grades in between. So we can do that, and you can have a really good plan that sets all that out. But if it's not implemented, and that means sometimes telling people, sorry, you can't build there, then it's not going to achieve anything. And I think politically that's often very difficult, particularly I think with small island states, because the decision makers are so close to the people that they're making decisions about, if you see what I mean. And it's sometimes difficult to be as objective as you have to be to make that sort of policy work in the interest of everybody.
Yeah, I'm looking at a question here from Nick Jackman about natural disasters. First of all, no disaster is natural. No. That's the first thing. And that needs to be part of the narrative change. Every disaster is created by man. I mean, a disaster, well, the United Nations ISDR defines disaster in the context of where the phenomenon originates. Frankly, I think that is wrong. Yeah, it has to be defined based on where the disaster happens.
Yeah.
So by saying disaster is natural, it takes away the responsibility from humans to take proactive action and to be resilient, because it's natural. It's an act of God. I can't help it. It's beyond my human capacity. It's an act of God. So it's not my problem. It's as Jamaicans say, it's Jah works. And once it's Jah works, I can't do anything about it. So once we continue to define disaster as natural.
Sorry, can you see it? Floods mostly impacting poor people. It's a justice issue. We suffer from psychological distancing, so we don't do the wide-scale implementation of solutions necessary to protect all.
Yeah. And I think that's to some extent that's universal. I think what Earl said about countries with a different political outlook, like Cuba, then there's probably easier scope to address that. But yeah, you end up with a situation where the poorest people in society end up living in the most hazard-prone areas, right. And therefore they are subject to disasters. But as Earl said, the disasters don't have to happen. The hazards will happen, but they don't have to turn into disasters.
Exactly. And the fact is that the government is no forced with the decision of trying to leverage, or should I invest billions of dollars to make an informal settlement, safe from flooding, when the income from that space can hardly pay anything. I mean, when you look at, because there's no taxes to get from that space, they're not employed, so they can't extract any income tax from them or land tax from them. So the government must say, okay, should I spend billions of dollars to invest in infrastructure in making an informal space safe, when there are spaces that are formal, that are paying taxes, are in need of a safe sort of investment? So the government is faced with that decision at the national level.
Yeah.
So there has to be some sort of social.
You bring an interesting. Sorry, I realize that there's a bit of a delay.
Yes, there has to be some sort of
interesting perspective there. How do we plan for urban growth that's more inclusive, or not just urban growth, but growth? So we don't want to marginalize or leave out rural populations or other vulnerable populations. But how do we plan for growth that's more inclusive and accessible to vulnerable populations?
Well, Steve is a spatial planning expert. So you understand the spatial planning dynamics that are involved in deliberately placing people in a particular space and providing for them.
And you have to.
So Steve, you want to tackle that then?
Yeah, yeah. I think, well, the ideal is to have a clear national strategy. So you've got a clear planning or spatial strategy for the whole country, the whole island, that gives guidance on areas where development can take place and areas where it shouldn't take place and everything in between, and recognises that there are people in disadvantaged situations and that they need special support. And I think that then has to be matched. So that's the sort of the top-down bit of it, and that has to be matched by equal resources going into the bottom-up part, so that communities are actually directly involved in the process of planning their places, and the resources go into building their capacity to engage in the planning system and to influence the planning system, and to really provide at that sort of very detailed local level the solutions that will help to implement the national strategy. But that's a big job. It's a lot of resources. It's a complete change of mind, and and if you don't do it with local communities, with people on the ground in their homes, it's not going to work, because they have to understand why it's happening, and they have to understand the consequences if they don't plan for the future, but also the benefits of really being involved in the opposite, in making those plans for the future.
The fact is that the fact is that urban growth in Jamaica is not something that is automatic. It is not planned, but it's approved. We have thousands of housing developments being approved outside the city limits on a yearly basis. So they are approved, not planned for. What we do not have is a sort of physical and social connection of those communities to the KMA, where persons back and forth those space to the KMA every day. So what we have is an increase in the urban persons who, as a matter of fact, persons who perceive that they live in the urban space, because there's no alternative. So you find that we build a lot of housing schemes, not communities, housing schemes, which are different from communities, because communities are a socially cohesive spatial unit. A housing scheme is a very abstract, non-spatial, non-social residential arrangement that is done through formal arrangement. Communities are more dynamic things. We have failed since the 1980s to translate the community social product into building housing schemes. And that social detachment or social abstractness that is lacking in housing scheme is part of the issue with Jamaica's urbanization dynamics.
Yeah, so you end up with housing in the wrong places and with the wrong connection.
Right.
Exactly.
So Steve, I want to ask you, first of all, are you seeing this same phenomena in other Caribbean areas, not just in Jamaica? And can you give us some examples of where they are incorporating this kind of community planning for the community rather than just developing houses?
Yeah, okay. I think it is quite widespread, in my experience, quite widespread across the Caribbean.
Okay.
I think probably Jamaica being, so Kingston being the big city that it is, it's particularly amplified there. Some of the work we've been doing in the East Caribbean, I think, is quite promising, or that we've been involved in, where we've been taking small community areas and small communities and working with them to, for instance, address recurrent flooding issues, but not by saying, no, well, we have to redevelop this with a renewal scheme. It's working with the people in their homes, looking at how they can adapt, looking at how in some cases buildings could be relocated, but basically keeping the community in place and engaging the community in that process really deeply. We've done particularly, I'm particularly proud of a scheme we were involved in Antigua doing that. again, I'm not sure it's good on plan. It's still got to be translated into action on the ground. But certainly the people that were engaged in it really started to understand it and really started to make a very positive contribution to the whole placemaking process that was involved in that.
Okay, so Antigua is a good example of where they're pulling this kind of planning together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
All right. So there was a comment from YouTube. Does one spatial plan work for the entire country? I see Dr. Bailey already. So to be.
You're breaking up.
I thought it was me.
You went static just now, Abigail.
Sorry, can you hear me? There was a comment from YouTube about whether or not one spatial plan can work for the entire country.
Let's look at it this way, Abigail. We now have a case where all the municipal corporations have articulated their development orders or local sustainable development plans. Isn't that so? So basically all local authorities have local sustainable development plans that they're working with. If you put those together, right? If you put the Manchester with the Clarendon, with St. Catherine, with the Kingston, the St. Thomas and Mary, I do not think they'll form a cohesive national whole.
No.
That answers the question.
I think you're right, because I think that you've got those development orders in place. So in a way, that the ideal will be you have a national spatial, I would say national spatial strategy or framework,
yes,
rather than a plan. Because when you say a plan, it sounds as if it's getting down to very, very precise sort of definitions of what can go on each piece of land, and it shouldn't do that. It should set the context for those local plans or local development orders.
Exactly.
Local plans.
But I think you can still make it work because those are in place now, and we're looking at new issues. You can have a national strategy that is addressing the issues of climate change, the issues that have been thrown up by the pandemic, and looking ahead with technological change as well. And it can set a new sort of new step of the vision that we're all working towards. And the local development orders can then be reviewed one by one locally, and making sure they're consistent with that overall objective, but very much locally based. So I think that it can work, but it's an iterative process.
And there has to be some coordination amongst the various local authorities.
Yeah.
One of the things that is taught in this process.
Okay, so I think we're gonna. Go ahead, Dr. Bailey.
I'm saying one of the things that is taught in this process is our system of local government. It either needs to be radically changed or abandoned, but it cannot continue in its current state. It is not serving the local interest properly.
It needs to be.
Either
Can you please again?
It needs to be totally abandoned or properly reformed. But in its current state, it is not. So it's not helping anybody at all.
Okay.
Is that because there's insufficient?
So it needs to be done.
It is because of the. Okay, well, coming from an academic standpoint, right? There was a recent comment in one of the national newspapers where one of the mayors was asking for experts to explain to him the reason why the flood waters are so silted. I mean, that is basic third form knowledge. When we have a mayor having that kind of questioning, it sort of exposes a lot of deficiencies at the intellectual level in our local authorities. That should not be the case. So the authorities should have the kind of expertise to inform the governance structure of these issues. It shouldn't be that should not be at all. That should not be at all. And there's much overlap between local government, central government,
Okay,
the
so we're going
MPs,
to
the
take a
councillor,
straw poll.
too many boundaries to
Okay.
Have we lost Dr. Bailey?
I think we have.
Steve, are you with us?
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So, well, we're gonna, yes, I can hear you clearly. So we're gonna just take this poll. What do you think are nature
Okay.
in the Caribbean? It's outdated roads, drains, sewage. Is it our water issues, extensive drought, traffic management within our urban centers? So we're gonna go to the result.
Okay, my internet went for a while.
Okay, that's interesting. I think we've lost Abigail now, but
I lost my connection for a while.
okay.
I'm back.
I'm back also.
Looking at the
Oh, did I?
looking at the outcome.
Okay.
The outcome of that. That's an interesting reflection of views. I suppose.
May I see those responses again, please, moderator? I lost them for a while.
Yes, can we see the responses again? So what is is by the Caribbean? 84% said outdated infrastructure, roads, drains, sewage, etc. 37% said water issues, 32% said traffic, and 60%, so coming in spaces. So we want you, Steve, you were just talking about, how interesting you found those results to be, whether or not outdated infrastructure.
Well, yeah, I think that is interesting because, and I can fully understand why people see it that way. What I want to do is just relate that to some of the things we were saying earlier, but because Earl referred to the problem of urban sprawl. And again, that's pretty endemic across the region. One of the consequences of urban sprawl is that you get excessively long runs of infrastructure, and you get far too much infrastructure in relation to the numbers of houses or other properties that it's serving, because it's inefficient and it's spread about all over the place rather than being concentrated. So that means that it's a burden to maintain it, and it doesn't get maintained because of other political and spending priorities. And I think one of the purposes of good planning would be to try and reduce sprawl, at least stop the onward progression of sprawl, and make much more efficient use of existing infrastructure. And a lot of it does need renewing, but at least when it's being renewed, then it's being renewed in a more efficient and more cost-effective way. And moving forward, there's less ongoing burden on the public purse to maintain what's necessary. But if you just continue to spread all over the place, and everybody has wires and pipes and roads connecting anywhere without any thought to the efficiency of it, it's not only a financial disaster, but it also leads all these things very much open to the impacts of natural hazards as well, because you've got much longer lengths of them that can be severed by events happening all over the place. So that was my view on that one.
Yeah, I agree with Steve on the sprawl issue. I think our sprawl concern is more about the functionality of our spaces, and the special units coming together to form a functional whole. We have too much emphasis on individual infrastructure and buildings in their own space, as against that infrastructure being part of a functional urban system.
Yeah.
And that is the sprawl that we saw from in Jamaica, well, in Kingston in particular, where each spatial element is looked at based on its own merit, but not as part of a functional urban system.
Yeah.
For example, when anybody puts a stoplight at a point, it is considered the impact of that point intervention on the entire stretch that depends on the stoplight to assist in proper traffic flow. When you fix part of a drain without ignoring the length, the full length of the drain, and it creates block up in one space. You see, so sprawl in our context is a lack of functionality of the urban spatial elements working together to form a functional urban system, both at the physical and social level. We have different agencies doing different things differently, not working together. So one is to fix the road today, the next day somebody else dig it up to put in a pipe, and so that there's no coordination amongst the different agencies. So at the agency level, the social level, physical level, the planning level, there's no coordination. Therefore, the urban center is not a functional, living and breathing organism.
Yeah.
And that's our sprawl concern.
Okay, so we have some responses coming in. Allison says, in my opinion, a number of the other issues listed in the poll are included in the outdated infrastructure. She absolutely agrees with Steve that improved efficiency also needs to be factored into addressing the problem. Mario says, what Dr. Bailey is explaining is a systems approach to planning. We lack that. And
yes,
foresight.
Of course.
Eleanor says, excellent points, Earl, excellent points. And if you noted that 68% of our respondents also spoke about lack of green spaces, but we want to talk about, what are the solutions here? So we've identified that there are issues with cohesion and pulling all the elements together. But what are the kind of solutions that we can bring out of this discourse?
As it concerns open spaces, you see, NEPA has a lot of regulations concerning how you provide the amount of open space based on different residential units, residential standards that are given. But I'm not convinced that developers are deliberately planning the open space to be a functional part of the development. It's the leftover land. The leftover land. As a matter of fact, what I've seen in some cases here, the open space serves, because there should be three types of common areas in a development: the open space, the green space, and the amenity space. So the open space takes in all that. The amenity space is space for garbage disposal and storage. Metering, electrical installations, those things. That's amenity areas. Yeah. The open space is for social gathering, social communal activities to take place. The green space is an ecological sink for the development. So we don't have that. We have one space and it does everything, and it's not planned for. So it's not a deliberate spatially accounted for in the design of the development. So maybe it's the marginal lands that is left over that they can't do anything with, because a developer is trying to squeeze as much capital from the land as they possibly can. So what's left over after that is done, that's the open space. And in some cases it becomes a dust bowl after a certain time. A dust bowl, nobody uses it. It becomes some informal entry points to the community, and it's not a functional part of the development, and nobody benefits from that.
Steve, can you tell us about some examples of where they're integrating their green spaces into environmental management, for example, flood mitigation or any of those other functions?
Yeah,
other parts of the world or in the Caribbean?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a Caribbean example to start with, when I'm going to go back to Antigua again, and the local area plan that they've worked up there for Cashew Hill, and that basically it focused on trying to deal with this big flood issue, and there's a large watercourse that runs right through the middle of the area. The sort of choice between, well, just making it into a concrete drain and making it run very fast, or actually integrating that with the green space. And the community was very keen to integrate it with the green space, have walkways that run alongside it, get natural areas as well as recreational areas, and use something that had to be done for flood risk purposes, for flood alleviation purposes, as an opportunity to create a sort of linked green spine running through the area. So that sort of thing can be done. I mean, looking at the UK, there's a lot of emphasis now on what they call sustainable urban drainage systems, which try to get away from hard engineered approaches to exactly the sort of thing I've just described. But again, it's not something that developers necessarily do without being forced into it. And so you have to have strong policies and the will to enforce those policies to make it work. And I know that some of the work we were doing last year with ESL and others, looking at the sort of the initial papers towards the National Plan for Jamaica, we were looking in some detail at that. So there are some ideas in there, but again, it's got to have the political backing and then the political will to put it into force.
Okay, I want to continue this discussion about nature-based solutions. You know, is it that it's public awareness that's lacking in terms of how beneficial nature-based solutions are? Or, as you mentioned, Steve, persons have to be forced into doing this kind of thing. You know, what are your thoughts on why we're not seeing more nature-based solutions? What's this strong love for concrete that we have?
I think it's partly a sort of a global cultural thing that we've had more than 50 years. We've had decades of expecting that we can engineer our way out of everything, and that concrete's good because it provides all the solutions. And I think we're belatedly finding that actually it creates as many problems as it solves. And some of the things that we've wiped out to put the concrete in place, we're actually doing a pretty good job in the first place. So go back to the mangroves example. And I think people very soon understand the logic of that once you start explaining it to them. But I think there's probably too many vested interests in making more concrete and using it.
Interesting point there. Earl, what's your take on that?
I don't think I'm not anti-concrete or pro-concrete. I believe that every space on the planet or every space in Jamaica offers the material that you need to live in that space. Yeah. For example, I don't think you should take limestone from Red Hills to build retaining walls up in Garden Town. Garden Town has its own ecological resources that can be used to build retaining walls in Garden Town. So when you bring the heavy, dense limestone on a shale environment, it exerts significant pressure on that space, and therefore it contributes towards land slippage and landslide. Right. And vice versa, you can't bring shale from Garden Town to build a retaining wall in Red Hills area. So I think each area, we need to use the indigenous material found in each areas to our advantage.
You're right, Earl, because if we're going to take a placemaking approach, then you need to amplify the distinctiveness of each place, and actually do it quite naturally. So you use the local materials, and each place does have its own character. Yeah. So
even in cases where a developer will get the land to develop, right, to build housing, and he will first go and strip the land of all the natural vegetation and dump that. And then after he's finished, he goes and buy topsoil and buy plants to put back inside there. And then spend a lot of money to keep them hydrated to let them grow. The natural plant should be scraped away, stockpiled, and bring back in after you finish your construction. But that's
placed
not done.
In a nursery of some sort.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
The space offers solutions on how to intervene in that place by itself.
Robert, says, it would be interesting to hear some of what is being done in Cuba, as it's also in the Caribbean region. Very interesting point, Earl, re the use of local materials. So can we hear a little bit more about what's being done in Cuba?
We have to understand that Cuba exists in a different political system, and therefore most of what is done there cannot be applied here without breaching people's constitutional and human rights. That's the first thing. But there's a new term now in what we call, instead of transferring strategies, transfer the policy. So if the policy is to provide safe, sustainable housing, that's the policy. The how is a different thing.
Yeah.
So we can translate the policies to end poverty, implement sustainable solutions, but the how is where we need to tweak it for our own social and ecological differences. So for example, I do not believe in noble zones, frankly. I think every space on the planet where there is life, there is life. So I see it, life, exactly. And therefore I think we can engineer solutions that are specific to the location to exist in that location. I do not believe in transferring technologies across space, because they will fail because of the differences in space conditions, right? So I say, for example, I had an article in today's paper where
Eleanor is saying life on gully banks, Earl.
Yes,
let's get your perspective. What do you mean by no bill zones, Earl? What are you talking about?
we have cities that are on gully banks and they are functioning quite well, like Venice. For example, when you say to somebody you can't build within 15 feet of a gully. 15 feet to somebody who needs the land to live on. That's a lot of land. So why can't we engineer the wall of the gully to be part of the wall of the building? It can be done.
Yeah, and you can have a policy that allows that. It's a graduated policy. So
exactly.
If you're in that distance, yes, you can build, but you've got to do this.
It can be done.
Yeah.
I just think our problem with these informal settlements is that, first of all, they are stealing people's land. First of all, you can't really steal land because you can't take it with you going anywhere. You occupy people's land without permission. And they lack the sort of infrastructure to make the land functional. But we have persons who are paying taxes who lack infrastructure anyway. Many persons who pay taxes who own their land have the same deficiencies in services to persons who squat on these lands. So I'm not. So my noble policy is this. We need to use indigenous material where they are found to inform spatial interventions. When you look at the Hagley Gap areas in Hagley Gap here and Gordontown, when you look at the older houses that have the concrete base and the timber superstructure, very light, not that much pressure on the land as the heavy concrete buildings. They have been there for decades, outliving some of these concrete structures. But will NHT lend me the money to build a house from log or timber? Will the bank finance my building a timber structure in a space that is prone to landslide because of heavy concrete superstructure? So are the other sectors are they gonna come on board now to assist me in exercising my ecological consciousness on the space I choose to build on? No,
let me ask you about a risk-based. Let me ask you about a risk-based approach to planning and to design. What role does these risk assessments play in how we plan or how we develop?
Risk assessment. Well, it depends on the motive behind the risk assessment. Is it for insurance purposes? Is it to inform intervention? Is it to inform design? Because different actors will demand different risk assessment for different purposes. For different reasons. If the approach is to inform design and intervention, then whatever the assessment finds to be the risk, right? then the mitigative strategy can be designed in the structure. It can be designed in resilience. For example, resilient building codes. Our building codes, as new as they are still outdated because they basically updated the older ones, changed some dates, changed from feet to metrics, but nothing substantive. So applying a national building code right across the board when there are so many micro climatic differences on our island may not be the best thing to do. We have to appreciate the micro differences in our ecology. For example, you can't build a road in Portland the same way in South Clarendon. Different ecological space. And therefore the material will be exposed to different climatic and weather conditions as they different from in South Clarendon. But it happens.
Okay. Steve, what's your take on risk assessments to inform planning and development?
I think I'd probably be a little bit more restrictive than Earl in some cases. So I think risk assessment is important because I think it hasn't featured much in planning decision making, either in the plan making process or in the deciding of planning applications part of it either. Not as much as it should have done. So I think the risk assessment should establish A, whether it's suitable to build in that particular location or those circumstances, and then B, if it is, what sort of precautions need to be built in to the structure or whatever it is that's being developed. So it should inform the design process, the locational choice process, and that, I suppose, taking Earl's point, it goes on to inform decisions about insurance and all sorts of things, and they interact with each other. But I think actually having risk assessment more deeply embedded in the whole planning process is a major objective that ought to be achieved.
Right. Simone had a point here. Can you scroll back up to Simone? Simone said, I'm not sure I agree with Earl. The idea that technologies and approaches cannot be transferred geographically. I believe they can, both geographically and temporally, i.e. learning from the past, provided that they are adapted to the local context and changed to address the specific context. So I'll ask Steve to speak about that first, and then we'll ask Earl for his opinion.
I responded to Simone's point in the chat.
Oh,
all right, so we'll talk about it. So let me hear what Steve has to say first, and then Earl, you can. I'm not able to see everything, so I just want to hear it from you all.
Okay, I think the point is well made, because I think we do need it is about learning from other places and from the past, and I think that there's a lot in, for instance, Jamaica's past that has been changed. The two things interact. It's been changed in response to what's perceived to be better in other places, and it actually might have been better to have not gone along with some of those examples from elsewhere. So some of the things that has naturally grown up and become practice in Jamaica that have then changed, perhaps were actually responding to the local circumstances in a better way than things that have been imported. But so I think you have to blend the two. I'm not sure if that's quite answered the question, but I certainly think, you know, we've got to be, planning has to be a constant learning process as well.
Let me look at
so Earl, you were saying something about it being able to be transferred, but it must be place sensitive, the technological interventions, which is exactly what Steve was saying a while ago.
When you go back to our historical conditions, you know, of the Jamaica is a high biodiversity, is a biodiversity hotspot. So one of the major errors that we have had in our history in terms of how our farming systems was the plantation system. It doesn't belong on an island with high biodiversity. Nowhere in Jamaica space do you have one plant dominating any area. So that was contrary to the island's natural ecological, biological makeup. I mean, biodiversity makeup.
Highly destructive.
Highly destructive. And the fact that sugarcane is failing and we are trying to save it still means we're not learning our lessons.
Yeah, because actually with climate change and actually some of the things from COVID as well, the need for greater self-sufficiency, then you need exactly the
diversity.
opposite.
Exactly, diversity. Right.
Yeah.
So having banana in one location, tobacco in one location, sugar in one location, all those coffee in one location. The coffee production in the Mavis Bank area is part of the problem with land slippage in the Mavis Bank area. It goes contrary to the tropical maritime rainforest conditions that the island is dominantly under.
Yeah.
Right, or in other areas where they're clearing land to plant for palm oil, like in Malaysia and other countries.
Yes,
like that.
and cassava.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have the chat is blowing up, guys. So let me see if I can keep track. There was one from Eleanor. Risk assessments. Where did that one? Is essential in the Caribbean context and indeed for the globe. We are facing climate risk and other natural hazard vulnerabilities. Mario says risk assessments focus on the more major and imminent risks. We need to move towards precautionary approaches that focus as well on risks with low chances of becoming hazards. These are the ones that typically have high impact and usually more difficult to recover from. Steve, do you agree with that? That's planning for lower risk.
Generally, I think the
lower chance risk.
The hazards are going to happen, but as I said before, it's stopping the hazards becoming disasters. But certainly, I think risk assessment and avoiding the most obvious hazards is a fundamental part of what a plan should try to achieve.
The issue is what happens after risk assessment? Because yes, we can assess risk, but what happens with that knowledge from the risk assessment? What happens with that knowledge? How is that used to inform design, to inform site preparation, to incite actual construction in many cases? That is where the gap is between the assessment results and the physical intervention, even policies.
Yeah,
and the fact is that we have persons who have invested billions in building systems. And until they can recover the cost of investing in that system, they're not going to change until they've exploited all the benefits of using that system in that space. It's as simple as that. It's an economic driver. We are still driven by our need for profit making. And some of that covers in my formal presentation. Abigail, you.
Okay, so you've spoken about how we want to discuss a little bit about making cities more climate resilient. So we're talking. You just said, what do we do with the knowledge after we've done the risk assessment? So let's talk about the solutions that can be put in place now to make our cities climate resilient. So we're talking about climate risks specifically there. Or you can speak about other risks as well. But I'm just going to jump to our third poll. Coming up on your screen right now. Do you think already established cities can become climate resilient? No. Do you think already established cities cannot become climate resilient? Yes, you think they cannot become climate resilient, or no, you think they can? Give them some more time. In the meantime, Steve, talk to me about how we can make our cities more climate resilient. Oh, there we go. 82% saying no, but no means they can become climate resilient. So so the question is, do you think that established cities cannot become climate resilient? They say no. So we think that existing cities can become climate resilient. And so I want Steve to just walk us through the hows of that, the where is it happening, and what lessons we can learn for the Caribbean.
I think there's several different layers of this. So there's the sort of almost the big scale infrastructure stuff, where we've got issues of coastal inundation, sea level rise, more frequent and more severe storm events. And so, yeah, there'll be either natural or nature-based solutions to those that can be applied. So that's part of it. And that's protecting the city as the impacts of climate change bite on it. But there's also the experience of living in the place. And so cities need to adapt in two ways. One to make, even in the Caribbean, I think, to reduce the impacts that we all make on the environment. So looking at that sort of shift away from fossil fuels for transport towards a system that uses renewables or uses our feet and gets away from over-dependence on cars. And making the places easier to live in so that we don't have to do as much moving about in the first place, which has all sorts of social benefits as well. So if we're creating livable places where green space and the buildings and the infrastructure are designed as a whole, then that can basically make them more climate resilient, as climate change resilient as well. And there's a lot of discussion at the moment that I think has been really boosted again by the whole pandemic situation on this concept of the 15-minute city or the 15-minute neighborhood. And basically looking at, I mean, it's sort of something that a city like Kingston had inherent in its DNA from the outset, and it's got blurred and it's got destroyed. And you could relatively easy, you know, I know that's these things are relative, but you could relatively easily re-envisage Kingston as a series of 15-minute neighbourhoods where people can walk to most of the things that they need within 15 minutes. Right. And they don't have to be buzzing about causing massive pollution and congestion. And at the same time, you're sort of protecting the whole place with these bigger infrastructure things. Does that help? Or I don't know.
Earl, take that traffic discussion a little further. You know, how can we make our transportation sector in the urban areas more sustainable?
First of all, we need to have one to make it sustainable. We don't have one. Did I just say that out loud? You need to have one first to make it sustainable.
So you have transportation but no system.
No system, yes, we have no system. To be serious, Abigail, there are three components to urbanization, right? First of all, it's the people, a density amount of people, amount of persons in a particular space, right? Of course, that space requires a certain overlay of infrastructure and service to make it work. And then there is a social product that is superimposed on that physical space. So the people, the space, and their behavior. Those are three components of urbanization. I think what we have is the density. The density part is okay. We have that, but the social behavior is not there, and the services are not there. That's disconnected. No. What is urbanization? Urbanization, urban planning is mainly concerned about household choices. So let's say we have 448,000 households in the KMA. And each day, each household has choices to make. Where to go to work, where to go to school, where to shop, all those things. And those choices are played out on the physical space, right? We need to have services to support those choices being made effectively. If that is not there, the choices become frustrated, right? It leads to mental retardation of the social conditions in urban space. It leads to conflict, which leads to crime and a whole host of other urban negative issues, right? So the urban transportation sector is one of the major services that we need to allow persons to make household choices at the physical level.
Right.
I want to move from home to work, from work to there, and if that is not there, it
Right.
thwarts those choices from being made effectively, and it creates an economic blight, so to speak, in the urban areas, right? The other thing is that we can't speak about resilience as if you say it's somewhere you reach and then you say, okay, we're not resilient, we're okay now, we're good now, or we developed. Resilience is an ongoing thing because the climate is dynamic. So when you look at places like Kobe and Tokyo, they are constantly reshaping their physical and governance systems and physical systems to accommodate the changes in what they're exposed to in terms of climatic conditions, tsunamis, earthquakes. I mean, they live with earthquakes on a daily basis. So they have basically built their culture around this ecological dynamics. We have not been able to effectively translate our exposure. Let me tell you, next 3-4 months, the headlines is not going to read. Jamaica is in for the worst drought ever. It's going to happen. And after that, we're going to have the worst rainfall period again ever. It's cyclical. I mean, how often can we be surprised of the same thing happening? I mean, that is just, it doesn't show growth. It doesn't show any growth on our part at all. We recycle the same news every year. And we were surprised, wow, the worst rainfall ever. Wow, the worst drought ever. I mean, when do we not be surprised of all this happen every year, right? So how do we translate this knowledge now into lubricating our urban services so they can perform effectively? Our drains are always overwhelmed. Not now. It's not now that it's been happening. Our internet systems doesn't work. Our sewage systems do not work. Rain set up GPS stop function. I mean, every system fails during weather conditions. They even fail during no weather conditions. So I mean, how do we are still failing to translate our ecological imperatives, our ecological realities in our systems? And we are socializing a frustrated urban population.
Yeah.
What's your vision for the future of the city?
I have five. I had a presentation. I have 5 bold steps, which I had outlined in my presentation to achieving sustainability in our cities. Where are those 5 bold steps?
Let's hear them.
First one is we need bold step 1, path defining desirable development and planning futures, right? Should I go in details in each step?
Briefly, we have 15 minutes to go.
Okay.
So,
okay. Bold step 2.
You're not going to take all
two.
15 minutes.
Okay. No. Bold step 2. Determine contemporary trends.
So number 1 was defining the future.
Path defining. If the planning can be path defining, path sustaining, and path dependent. What we want to do, we want to deliberately define the path we want to be in the future. The path we want to take to reach where we want to be in the future. It can't be dependent on other social and political variables. It can't be dependent on climate. It has to be deliberate, right? Secondly, we need to determine contemporary trends, see the trends we need to get rid of, and those we want to take with us into the future.
Yeah.
To make future projections. 2, we need to determine new modes of resource transformation and resource distribution for the future, which is plan and development, right? Then bold step 4, determine the impacts and consequences of the previous pathways. And pathway 5, develop mitigation and performance standards and regulations. Basically, incorporating resilience in all the different parts. Those are my 5 pathways to sustainable cities.
Perfect. So, Steve, I want to get your take on the 5 pathways, deliberately defining the path, assessing the trends, aligning the resources, looking at the impacts, and then pulling together the regulations, mitigation measures, etc. Tell me your thoughts on those 5 bold steps.
I will try to do so. I'm not sure I've got them all down, but I'll have a stab at them. I mean, yeah, it sounds good.
I think Dr. Bailey just put it in the chat.
Oh,
awesome.
Right. Good. Yeah, I basically agree with that. I think you're right. I think you need a clear vision of where you're trying to get to. You don't just sort of drift with things. And I think we made the point earlier that planning, not just in Jamaica, not just in the Caribbean, certainly in this country, it's been far too much focused on reacting rather than actually planning. It's not been deliberate. It's not been setting out what we want to achieve. It's just been responding to things. And with the trends part of it, there's been a long-standing tendency in planning to sort of see it as a matter of predicting and providing. So you just take a look at statistical information, the data, you project it forward and you say, well, that's how things have been. So we assume it's going to be like that for the future. So we'll just provide this to meet that. And actually it might be the wrong thing. That might be causing all sorts of harm. And so if it's a harmful trend, you don't predict and provide for it. You predict and say, well, what can we do to reverse this? What can we do to do this a different way? So I think that the approach that Earl's outlined is a way of doing that. I think it's sort of the process that is often used is to look at the situation as it is and decide, well, what do we want to stop? What do we want to start? What do we want to continue? And I think that's fundamental. And we just, it needs to be always under review, so that
always
so that we see plans always have to have so many years. So they're 10-year plan, of 15-year plan, 20. Right. And the number of years is totally irrelevant. It should be a plan that's looking into the future as far as we can, but it's going to be adjusted bit by bit as we go towards it. So it's got some fundamental long-term principles that you're fairly certain are going to take you to where you want to be, and they're not going to change. But the way that you get there, the route is going to change as you go along. And so you have to review it all the time. And I think that sort of 5-step approach, if it's an iterative approach, if it's reviewing and reviewing and reviewing and adjusting it and involving the community in that process, is a good way forward.
Yeah.
Just take us a little bit further with involving the community. You had mentioned that earlier. So I want you to talk a little bit about how important that is and what role does the community play in developing these kind of plans?
Well, the people who live in a place are basically the experts in the place they live in. And so as planners or as engineers or as architects, people might have an expertise that is useful to those people who live in the place, but actually it needs to respond to their knowledge and needs to take full account of their knowledge and treat them as equal experts if it's going to work. And so we need a process that can actually do that. And again, it's one of those things that sounds great in principle, but it's quite difficult to apply in practice. But I think politically, that's something that needs to be developed. And I think if politicians can engage with that and engage with their communities, and professionals can let down the mystique that they use to sort of guard their bit of the market, yes, then we can all get along much better and produce much better outcomes.
Let's talk, Earl, a little bit about political will.
Wow.
Political capital. Yeah, let's go there. You know, what needs to happen? What kind of engagement do we need to see from our politicians?
Well, like I said before we came online, Abigail, our language needs to be in sync with that of our politicians, meaning not only our language content, but our language in terms of our interests. Because look at it, we're all about the same things, people and places. It's the same concern we have. How do we, because take it from a how do I define development when I use the word development? Development is creating resources from material, resource transmission, creating resources. And it means a resource is something that has value for human society, right? Planning then becomes the means of distributing those resources, all right? It means that the two main basic resources that we create and distribute are land and people. We create land through land use. We say that is residential, commercial, industrial, and it gives it value. And then we say, okay, let's put residential over there, commercial there, and we distribute it, right? This is the basis. So politicians and developers and planners have the same interest in land and people. Now, when I'm doing spatial planning, I have to be cognizant of constituency boundaries, because I can influence the amount of voters in a particular space. Now, as a developer and planner, that might not be my primary interest. Right. I'm looking more on the capacity of the space to provide transportation services, health services, access to education facilities, security, all those things. It may be that the MP has no concern about capacity of that space to accommodate 6 million people. He wants 6 million voters, despite the fact that the space doesn't have the health services, the transportation service, all those things to accommodate them. So how do we now leverage our differences? We understand people distribution on space. It means that there has to be a deliberate intervention in saying what happens in each space in terms of resource provision. We have too many persons being served with too little resources, and too little persons be served with too many resources. There has to be some equity in how we distribute our health services. Right. Let me tell you, if somebody gets sick, so somebody gets a heart attack in Norbrook, right, where the upper class, the wealthy class lives, and a poor man gets a heart attack in Vineyard Town or Franklin Town, right? The poor person can reach KPH in 2 minutes and save his life. Right. The person now cannot reach KPH in 2 minutes, because KPH is where you have to go to get that kind of service. So there is a sort of, there's an inequity in how we distribute our people. Because we have to learn that when you move people from one space to the next space, no MP will deny approval for a housing scheme in his constituency. That's bringing in people, bringing in voters.
Exactly.
Despite the fact that they are in a place that is prone to flooding. So how do we ensure that the developer incorporate those flooding concerns, mitigative measures in the design of the location? So I'm saying, yes, okay, you want voters there, but at least bring to bear on the developer the fact that you have to incorporate proper drainage and flooding infrastructure in your development. That is not done. So I'm not against giving a MP the voters, but yes, people need to be exposed. People need to live in spaces that work for them ecologically and socially. It's as simple as that. How do we distribute?
You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on that last point that Earl made there. It's that ecological approach. I think it's seeing humanity as part of the ecosystem, not as apart from it, and therefore, cities are ecological, and we've got to get the ecological balance right all the time, and that's both the human activity and the natural ecosystem within which we exist, which I know is a bit philosophical, but I think it's fundamental to.
It is fundamental. It's fundamental as it is fundamental to principle of sustainability. Yeah. And one of the issues why sustainability has not gotten the traction it should have gotten over the last 6 decades is that we talk about the future. It's always about the future. It's never about the present.
Yes.
It is never about the present. It's always about the future generation, the future 2030, 2050. But the fact is that psychologically, we inherently believe that those who will come after us, no matter what we do, are going to be better off than we are. It's part of our psychological makeup. We believe that inherently.
Right.
No matter how bad we mess up or what we do, person before us, after us, we are going to be better off than we are. Once we set timelines for development, plan 2030, plan 2040, plan 2060, we take the responsibility from ourselves and give it to the future. And that is a psychological deficiency in sustainability. This focus on the future generation and the future prospects, never on the present. It's a fault in our sustainability narrative.
Right. Well, I don't know if you can believe it, but we only have 5 minutes left.
I'll give it to Steve.
And so I just want to look. I want to look to see, what's happening in the chat, what's happening in YouTube land, and what's happening here on Zoom. We have a lot of people saying preach, Earl, yes, yes, yes. Very insightful points. Anything from YouTube? No. Okay. So what we want to do to wrap up is to just, I know Earl gave his 5 bold steps, but I want us to, in 30 seconds, just leave some takeaway points. What should we go home having left this session? What would you like to leave with the audience? 30 seconds, Steve, go ahead.
I think I'm going to go back to the involvement of communities in planning their places, and that involves a fundamental emphasis on place-based planning, so that we're really looking at trying to create places that support the well-being of the people whose lives connect with them and in them. And if we apply that together with that understanding that we're all part of an ecosystem, then we can actually start to make some progress that is climate change resilient and hopefully leading us into a much more sustainable future. That's it.
Thank you. Steve Kemp, Executive Director at Open Plan, based in the UK, spatial planner as well. Dr. Earl Bailey, please give us your final thoughts, your 30 seconds.
My final thoughts is for every single person on the planet to make their lives green. We need to reach a point where we see where our livelihood depends on us having access to clean water, to clean air, nutrient-filled soil, proper plants and animals. We need to see our lives connected. Too much of our life is devoid of naturalness. We need to reconnect at an individual level with nature. We are nature. We are nature, so we need to be part of our own nature. There are persons who have never picked a fruit of a tree in some countries. Never picked a fruit of a tree. I can't imagine that. No, we do not link water. When we think water, it's supermarket. When we think orange juice, it's in a box. We don't feed the orange fruit. Persons are not aligning their life, their living to ecological elements. We need to reconnect with nature, make our lives green. Make our lives green. See the importance of the environment, in making our lives successful. We're not seeing that. That needs to be our refocus at the individual level.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Earl Bailey. If you missed any of this session, you can watch it again on YouTube. You can watch any of the week's sessions. We started on Monday. You can watch it on the Live Echo YouTube channel. So feel free to go there. We want to just say a big thank you again to our sponsors, Scotiabank, Coca-Cola, Junk Cayman, that's a recycling company out of Cayman, as well as Cayman Business Solutions. Thank you to the Live Echo team, the Environmental Solutions team. And thank you so much for tuning in to day 4. We'll see you tomorrow, day 5, and our wrap-up session where we'll be looking at waste management strategies in the Caribbean. So walk good, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day.
Thank you, Abigail. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. Steve, pleasure.
All the best.
Pleasure. All the best.